Hi everyone, Gundam here for our fourth and brand new episode of our special edition Lore of the Universal Century. Today we're going to the UC90s in an attempt to answer a particular question, which is... Yep, in this video we are going to present every club variant used by the Earth Federation Space Forces, how much they differ from the regular model, when did they appear, and extract every bit of mechanical knowledge we have on them so far. But let's start by the beginning. What is exactly the Club class? The Club class, aka the Mini Kylum, is a class of light cruisers introduced by the Earth Federation Space Forces in UC-93. 292 meters long, this class was developed by Vic Wellington, which was the ship manufacturer who had previously developed the Magellan. The Club was more or less a lighter version of the Raikailu, which was at the time considered the best ship design available, and was itself created by bastardizing the best features of the Dogose gear and the Alexandria class. As said earlier, the Club class is a light cruiser and had initially been designed to replace the Salamis Sky, which was the mainstay light cruiser since UC-84. In comparison with the Salamis, the Club has a lower firepower, but its design, which put an emphasis on patrolling operations and mobile suit deployment, gives it other advantages. While the Salamis Sky can only crew up to 4 mobile suits, the Club can accommodate 6 of them, and its longer deck enable a better deploying rate since the catapult is longer than the tiny counterparts of the Salamis Sky. Nonetheless, despite being faster than the Salamis, the Club has a shorter operational capacity. For these reasons, the Club was never able to replace the Salamis Sky. This was even more accentuated by the fact that a lot of veteran captains had went through the Grips War on their first Neosian war with the Salamis and were reluctant to change its safe value. Instead, the Club became an alternative to the Salamis, and both ships continued together their service even as late as UC-153. However, being less heavily armed than the Salamis Sky doesn't mean that the Club is unarmed, on the contrary. Its two primary weapons are a pair of twin-barrel mega-particle cannons mounted on its port and starboard sides close to the mobile suit hangar. Despite their sizes, these turrets support a 90 degrees movement in every direction, which is useful against mobile suits outside the Club from topside. Aside these cannons, the Club also possesses 14 anti-air turrets, with 12 of them being single-barreled and 2 of them, located beside the bridge, being double-barreled. The Club also makes use of missiles launchers. The bow is equipped with 6-tube missile launchers for anti-ship combat and which can even accommodate nuclear warheads. Behind the bridge, a 8-tube missile launcher is installed and can fire what is called rear missiles, which are mainly used against mobile suits. Now, about the ship paint scheme. According to Shark Counterattack and Victory Gundam, the Club's standard production colors are grey, with the deck being orange. However, this is not an absolute rule. Some ships seen in F91 seem to have a whitish look, and another known Club, the Radals, is known to have been painted it white. Other Clubs, like the infamous Unkai, make instead use of a navy blue color scheme. For a fun fact, the Radals and the Unkai were the ships which transported the Sinanju's time and were later sunk by Full Frontal after he hijacked the unit. The Ragels, the major ship of the Theta Plus in Moon Gundam, has also its own paint scheme, which is both grey and black. Aside that, the remaining Clubs with a different color scheme are the Clubs of the Bagley team, seen in Victory Gundam, which are painted very much like their own Salamis Skies in green colors. While the class officially appeared in UC-93, the Club had already entered service as early as UC-91, as seen in Moon Gundam with the Ragels and the Rathian. Its performance eventually proved admirable, and the Club served in the Second and Third Neosian War, All-Mobile Conflict, Cosmo-Babylonia War, and even as late as the Zaskar War, no less 60 years after its official introduction, making it in one of the most successful and trustful ship designs of the entire Universal Century. But enough setting for today, and let's get back to our Club variants. The first variant of the Club is not a whole class of new ships, but a single model. I'm obviously talking about the Damascus, which is featured in the controversial movie Gundam Narrative. Narrative was one of these movies which had good mobile suits, good characters, and amazing flashbacks, but was pinned down to the stupid plot filled with new type wizardry. This being said, the movie gave us the Damascus, which is an amazing ship and far more important than one could expect. But let's talk about the Damascus. Story-wise, it's just a wet modified club class, which serves as the mothership of the Caesar Team Jesta and later of the narrative Gundam itself. Aside the colors, the Damascus are other notable differences. First of all, the Damascus features two hangars, one on the top, like any club, and one on the bottom, which is characteristic of the Damascus and kind of reminds us of the Alexandria class. But the number of hangars is not the only thing which differentiates the Damascus and the regular club. The top hangar of the Damascus is actually enlarged in comparison with the standard hangar, which is something convenient for the plot, as it allowed the small cruiser to accommodate the needs of the large narrative Gundam. For that reason, the entrance of the hangar is not anymore a hatched entrance, but is made of door opening on both sides. The last difference between the Damascus and its base model is on the cooling fins. For the information, these fins are made to cool down the megaparticle cannons to allow continuous fire barrage, not to extend the operational capacity of the club. And here, narrative taps something truly great, but which is sadly often disregarded. In fact, the Damascus retained the same overall firepower that its more common brethren, while using shorter and thinner cooling fins. What does it mean then? Well, it showed that 7 years after the official introduction of the club class, modernization was on its way, and that the Earth Federation Space Forces were trying to get rid of these encumbrant cooling fins, while retaining their efficiency through the use of miniaturization, something which will be very important in later see. The shorter fins of the Damascus seem irrelevant at first sight, but it's actually a very important detail, which paved the way for some of the other variants we are going to see later. The second club variant we are going to discuss about is the Space Ark, featured in the F91 movie. Like the Radals, the Space Ark is white, but of course it's not the only difference this variant has in comparison with the regular club. To understand the technical differences between the Space Ark and the basic club, we have to remind ourselves the role of the Space Ark. Unlike the club, this variant isn't a light patrol cruiser, but a trainer ship. Like many lightly armed corvettes and soon-to-be decommissioned destroyers used by the naval academies around the world, the Space Ark is not expected to partake in flight duty, and thus isn't meant to fight extensively during live combat. Because it doesn't need to use the twin megaparticle cannons repeatedly, there is no real need to cool them down, so the long radiator fins are discarded as well. Since these also serve for a better fuel consumption, the Space Ark introduced new fuel tanks, located near the engines to palliate this issue. In addition, the bridge had also been renewed and can now retract to protect the crew. Now, the most interesting feature about the Space Ark. The ship is made with an emphasis on operations under gravity, and it is what explains the different shape of the Space Ark deck, which give better adherence to the mobile suit taken off from it. In F91, the ship is also shown cruising inside the colony cluster and past the docking bay. Since we know that the Space Ark put an emphasis, I quote, on operations under gravity, and that cruising inside colonies is something only ships with a Minovsky Crest system can achieve, we can theorize that the Space Ark has one as well. Still, the Minovsky Craft system has never been listed as a standard equipment included in the Space Ark, so it could be either that the Space Ark has something else to cruise inside the colonies. And since it doesn't have cooling fins, the Space Ark can land on the ground via new landing gears. The Space Ark appeared in the UC-100s and was part of the same program which spawned the Reinforce, a class that we will see sooner. Because it is born from a fully-fledged refitment program, we can say that the ship seen in F91 was not the only Space Ark around, and the Blade Route, portraying the Silhouette Formula manga, proved that the Space Ark class was quite common in the early late UC. In the end, the Space Ark proved to be a successful trainer and proved its worth during the Cosmo-Babylonia War. Time for a more consistent variant. We are talking of the Reinforced class, prominently featured in Victory Gundam. Before we enter technical presentations, I think it's important to clear a particular misconception. The Reinforce is a class of ships, and not of one of a type custom cruiser, as stated for example by the Gundam wiki before it was corrected. This misconception came from the fact that only one ship was presented in Victory, and it was the name ship of the class, so people wrongly interpreted the Reinforce as a custom vessel when it was not. Crossbone Gundam closed that debate as a whole fleet made of Reinforces made an appearance as they tried to apprehend the Mother Vanguard. So now we know for sure it's a class of ships. As said earlier, the Reinforce was born from the same program which spawned the Space Ark class, so the two ships are actually cousins and club variants. However, the Reinforce class doesn't change its specification and remains a light cruiser, but its design was modified to put an emphasis on autonomous operations and mobile deployment. First difference with the club class is the presence of a second mobile suit deck, which serves as a recovery deck. This drastically improves its deploying rate in comparison with the average club because it can send out and recover different mobile suits at the same time. Second big features is the improvement of its firepower. While few turrets have been removed, the Reinforce retained the 2 megaparticle cannons and all the missiles launchers. Even better, it possesses 2 additional megaparticle cannons, which bring the number of these double-barreled weapons to 4 units, something which allowed the Reinforce to go, despite its small size, against larger ships like the Squid class. But isn't there something else you notice? Yes, the Reinforce, despite having more weapons to cool down, removed the large fins of the club class and instead relocate downscale version of them under the bow. This proves of the advance in the technology inside the cooling fins, something we already discussed with the Damascus, and is the reason why many consider Damascus to be the first step in the direction of the Reinforce. Still, the miniaturization is not perfect, and the Reinforce, like the Space Ark, needs fuel tank blocks in order to retain the same operating time. However, the Reinforce fuel tanks are more effective than the Space Ark version and enable the light cruiser to have a longer operational capacity than the average club. Among the last differences are also a bridge capable of retracting during combat and more powerful and more protected boosters. According to Chronicle Asher, the original Reinforce is a 50-year-old ship at the time of Victory, which would bring its first deployment in UC-103, or at least in the early UC-100s, thus making it contemporary of the Messer and the lot of single Hathaway Flash. This is something which could be nice to see on screen and could be tapped in future side stories of that era. The Reinforce was replicated in large numbers, but was never able to supplant the club class, which instead spawned another successor variants which I will later present. Nonetheless, it was a very stubborn and effective ship, and which, as seen in Victory, was able to defeat much larger and modern foes. The only thing it needed was a grain of plot armor, an experienced captain, a bit of luck, and most importantly, an amazing and insanely cute new type kid. Now about our fourth and last variant for the club series, which is nothing less than the club refit. But what is exactly this line of ships? Well, at first sight you would probably say, hey, that's just a regular club class, how is that a different ship? And you would be quite right. Externally, the club refit is at 100% identical to the regular club. Then, why are we talking about it? Well, because the club refit would be for the club what the Jaeger normal type is for the regular Jaeger, a modernized version, very similar, obtained by modifying pre-existing units, but with additional features, and in the case of the club refit, they are quite significant. First of all, the club refit is equipped with a Minovsky craft system. We talked about the Minovsky craft system earlier. Basically, this system scouts a Minovsky particle, which will form a cubic structure around it, named the E-field. Since the E-field cannot penetrate conductive materials such as the Earth's surface, the Minovsky particle will form a sort of cushion under the ship, allowing it to cruise independently in low atmosphere. In UC-79, the system was still in its infancy and could only be mounted on dedicated ships like the Pegasus class or large mobile armors like the Azdan. Throughout the rest of the early UC, the system evolved slowly but surely. At the time of Unicorn, the Minovsky craft system could be mounted on ships which weren't initially meant to have one, as in with the Rakylum, and in UC105 it became mountable on large mobile suits. In the UC100s, some of the Clop and Salamis received them as well, which became the first step to the Clop's refits. The second main features of the Clop refit was the beam shield, which had become a common tech on mobile suits till the UC130s. Unlike many techs in the Universal Century, the beam shield evolution wasn't centered around miniaturization, but around enlargement, and the ships started receiving them in the UC140s. The beam shield was a very good asset for mobile suits, but on ships, it was a ridiculous yet absurdly effective asset. With it, a ship could withstand heavy fire barrage without being immediately wrecked, and thus the survivability of the crew increased drastically. In Victory Gundam, the Alexandria-class Gunlord was able to penetrate the defenses of Kayla's Gilly only thanks to such feature, so a beam shield enabled a single 70-year-old cruiser to break through a whole fleet of brand new cruisers. Let that sink in. As a captain, I would prefer to have one installed for sure. In the Clop refit case, the beam shield is mounted in the lower section of the nose, a position shared with the Rakylum class refit, Jeanne d'Arc. Combined with the Minovsky craft system, the beam shield enabled the 6 decades old design of the Clop to reach a stalemate against the newer ships fielded by Vespa and to remain relevant on the front line. In the end, the Clop refit became the norm at the original surviving Clops were all modified into Clops refits, and it remained the new standard until the end of the Federation itself. And we have now recented every Clop variants used by the Earth Federation Space Forces in the Universal Century. This will be all for today's video, but stay tuned for future lore content delivered on the same channel. Hit the like button and most importantly, comment and subscribe as it will really help the channel to flourish. So long fellow new types until the time of our next special edition.